that are here to put forward their submission this afternoon. Just for your information, submitters, as you've already been advised, you've been allocated 5 minutes to present, at which time a bell will ring, and there's also 5 minutes allocated for questions. Don't worry, if you do run over your first 5 minutes, we're not going to make you cut off straight away. We do give you the opportunity to finish what you're saying. And we will invite you up to the front of the room when it's your time to speak. And so our first submitters this afternoon are Andrew and Bev Robertson.
That's me.
Welcome, Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. Basically, I wrote this as to the Mayor and Councillors about the proposed rate increases for Bayview, because I can only speak about Bayview and the area I live in. As 18-year residents of Ferguson Street, Bayview, we were amazed and upset by the massive proposed increase in Bayview rates. In the 18 years we've resided at Bayview, there have been only 3 items of remedial or maintenance work done in this area by the City Council. These include oversealing the street with 2 coats of sealing chip around 12 or more years ago. No repairs done to it beforehand, just sealed, just an overcoat. A road drain dropper pipe paced across the road from where we live and grating put in it, and that's it. No pipe away from it or anything like that. So there's no stormwater controls in our area because we live on the gravel bank. We don't need them. A weird curbing and marking around the eastern end of Fannin Street, which must have cost a fortune because there were about 3 or 4 people there for 3 weeks doing that job. So I don't know what it achieved, but it didn't really achieve much. This does not fill us with hope of getting our roads, curbing and channelling up to the same standard as the rest of Napier. Over 90% of the roads in Bayview are way too narrow. Ferguson Street is only 4 to 5 metres carriage width wide that's usable. The reason we say useful because in most places the edge drops off sharply, 100 to 150 mils off the edge. So the locals don't go near that. And so it's only a one-way street. And it's only a good driveway width, I suppose. And only all of the other roads in Bayview are similar, apart from Patani Road and Rogers Road. From a health and safety viewpoint alone, Ferguson Street needs to have a road width of at least 10 metres with curbing and channelling and footpaths on both sides of the road. This is because there's been the rotary pathway to Bayview, which stops when it reaches Ferguson Street. That means that walking and cycling groups, which are increasing all the time, are competing for road space along the whole length of Ferguson Street. Never mind the poor residents wanting to access the road or walk in the gardens alongside the road, where they're subjected to people chattering at the top of their voices as they ride and walk along the roadway. We call them squealy wheelies or squawky walkers. And they do speak very loudly. Cyclists ride 2 or 3 abreast and seem to expect right-of-way over cars. This is totally unsafe. Signs will not be sufficient. Any accidents along the length of Ferguson Street can be laid fairly and fully on the council, as it's been brought to their attention many times by many people in the area. So with all that increased traffic, driving and parking becomes a very hard thing to do in Ferguson Street. The other health and safety factor is the overhead power lines. While Napier City Council is not responsible for putting power underground, they do have influence on the power companies to ensure their ratepayers are looked after safely. In a major earthquake, most of Bayview area and even inner suburbs that want to travel inland will not be able to pass through Bayview safely, as there would likely be power lines down all over the road. Now, you come along to that in an emergency situation, you're going to walk over them and say, we can guarantee they're not live? Because you can't guarantee they're not live. So that would stop people safely getting to the hills. So it is an important one to look at. Every other surface from Napier City for infrastructure, we pay for. These include water, sewerage, waste and recycling. Our water meters are read annually, and if we exceed our 300 cubic metres of water, we pay for it. This doesn't happen in any other suburb. We actually exceeded ours once because there'd been a water main repair. and it had put a stone in the line, came into our place, and it jammed our Ajax valve. So we exceeded the 300 cubic metres that were allocated. We had to pay for that. It was $35, I think. But it has since been repaired. To access Napier, we have to drive, and this can be a problem, especially when older. This means we also have increased costs over other Napier residents, as they can access buses more easily and shops are more easily accessed. There are no conveniently timed buses for Bayview residents. Possibly smaller transport units, such as vans with seating for up to 12, and more frequent runs could help. To place an increase of between $5 and $15 per week on rates is unconscionable in this time so soon after COVID-19 and its effects on household incomes. It amounts to a 25.6% increase in rates. Funnily enough, our new property valuations will give exactly that amount of increase in our rates with the new property valuations. It will give us a 25% increase. So that if you put the two of them together, we're going to end up with damn near a 50% increase in our rates, which is not on in any form. The requirement for a stormwater payment of $152.54 is also an excuse to take money for no purpose at all, as most of Bayview drains totally naturally, particularly those residents to the east of State Highway 2 through to Rogers Road, plus Lacane Road. We're on the boulder bank and around 8 to 10 metres above sea level. That means that any stormwater that is on any of these properties soaks into the ground very easily, even with 20 to 30 mils per hour rainfall. This is because underlying around 100 to 150 millimetres of soil, most gardens in the area are on very free draining pebbles, ranging in size from 70 mils down to 5 mils. That means no stormwater that needs NCC control or costs. As the Mayor presented a comparison with West Shore as being relevant, I would like to present my thoughts on a comparison with West Shore. West Shore has a far larger retail and commercial area as well as industrial and entertainment areas. So most Napier City services are close by and can be reached by bus or bike easily and within a short space of time. Bayview House, however, has to travel at least 8 k's to reach Napier City services. Most of West Shore power is underground, most of Bayview isn't. West Shore has a wide thoroughfare with good curbing and channelling, room to park on the roadside and footpaths on both sides of the roads in a lot of cases. Some footpaths are over 2 metres wide. Bayview has few footpaths, fewer curbing, channelling, and most streets have narrow roadways. Altogether, West Shore looks the very model of a seaside suburb. Bayview doesn't. Until Bayview infrastructure is upgraded to match West Shore's, we will protest the Ombudsman about an unfair increase of over 25 to 50% addition to our rates. In the past, we were offered low-cost sewerage connections. This blew out to a 33% increase over promised costs. Then all of a sudden, after the compulsory connection of the low-lying village part, there was no room for further connections without complete rebuild of the sewerage system. This is typical of all dealings we have with NCC. Lots of promise and no delivery. The other part was inflating costs after promising subsidies. Bayview has no faith in any promises to carry out work by NCC, so therefore will not pay extra rates on the promise of improved infrastructure, infrastructure. We won't pay the proposed 100% rates until there's 100% parity in infrastructure. Apart from the increased costs for no gain, the health and safety side will need addressing. There will be accidents and injuries attributable to the lack of fit-for-purpose infrastructure, as well as extreme problems in a natural disaster such as an earthquake. This letter was prepared for the Napier City Council hearing of objections to rating changes for Bayview Napier. This does not address the rural zoning problems, as they are a different issue outside our scope of reference as residents in the rural residential classification. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there any questions from councillors? Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Hi, Andrew.
Thank you.
Hi, Andrew. Sorry, a question from me.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your submission, and I had read that in advance. I was interested to get your view. The rates that we're proposing to change don't cover roading or infrastructure, etc. They're the ones that cover public toilet.
We get the general rates. We get the same general rates. There's no special roading rates We get the general rates the same as everyone else.
Yeah, so it's the rate that covers, for instance, the pools and the libraries and the public toilets, etc.
Yeah.
I was just interested in your view as a resident on your access to those kinds of services.
To
The library, pools.
Yeah, well, we have to hop in the car and drive to the library, especially as it's so inconvenient to come into the city here to go to the library. Parking's darn near impossible. We go out to Taradale, so it still requires a drive. No public transport to take us there.
Thank you.
And just to provide some clarification there, that it does actually cover roading, what we are discussing here. So obviously, having access for you to be able to drive into facilities such as this, then the rates does cover that roading that you're utilising as you drive around the city.
Yeah, but it just doesn't justify the costs coming on us for that to the same level as the other suburbs which already have the suitable infrastructure that we don't have.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you for your submission. I just liked your points on the public transport, and I wondered, that's covered by the regional council, and I believe they're looking for consultation on their proposed changes. So I just thought I'd let you know that that's out and looking for feedback, and you've probably got some good points.
Thank you for that. I will certainly put something in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
And next I would like to invite Janet Campbell up to give her submission. Hi, Janet.
Hi, my name's Janet Campbell. I live at 240 Onehunga Road in Bayview, which is a small area of lifestyle blocks at the end of a no-exit road. It's probably a road not all that many people know of. Okay, that down there? Yep, okay. Our area was originally part of a Lands and Survey farm, which is now a Land Court farm, which was subdivided into, our area was subdivided into 10-acre blocks for returned servicemen following World War II. Most of the blocks were then established as market gardens, orchards and small livestock farming like cattle, sheep, pigs. Most of these 10-acre properties have since been subdivided into 2 properties, which is what's permitted under the district plan. But the area itself remains distinctly rural. We're a narrow, no-exit road. Most of us grow fruit trees and raise and graze animals, sheep, cattle, goats, horses. The reason I'm describing this is to help you understand that reclassifying our particular area as residential just simply doesn't make sense. I expect that you've read my submission, but the reason I chose to speak was really just to emphasise the difference between an area like ours and urban Napier. So basic points are: we provide our own sewerage with no council assistance. We live on a narrow rural road with no footpaths. We have open drains, an open speed limit, although after 5 years of lobbying, we do have a courtesy 50k limit where the road's particularly narrow and busy, particularly in the summer when people come to buy apricots. Our properties are used for a variety of rural activities, growing fruit trees, vegetables, grazing and growing a variety of animals. We're connected to the city water supply as a result of all property owners at the time, which is approximately 20 years ago, contributing to the collective cost at the time of getting the water connection from near the main road. We all have water meters, unlike most urban Napier properties. And the district plan prevents further subdivision of all but one property now. We could apply for a resource consent, but to subdivide, but that's an expensive process anyway. But even if further subdivision was allowed, the current infrastructure, the roading, the sewage and the drainage is really inadequate for more intensive housing. So I guess the other point I really wanted to make was that I believe your definition of a rural property, it just seems to have been established without reference to the council's district plan, which doesn't define us as a residential area and doesn't treat us the same. Your proposal in reviewing the rating system was to ensure that similar properties pay similar rates, and I believe that the proposal is contrary to us. And my suggestion is that you consider establishing a separate category for lifestyle properties. I think that would basically cover our semi-rural situation. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Janet. Do we have any questions from councillors? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.
I would now like to invite Tony Johnson up.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak on this matter. It first came to light when I was invited to attend the meetings on the initial discussion points, and I attended a meeting. The first meeting I attended was at Taradale, and we were given a very eloquent presentation by Gary, who I believe is the Investments and Finance Manager, detailing why this proposal was being put forward. My understanding from that overhead projection display was that the main reason for doing this was to be fair to all ratepayers. The rationale presented was that people living in rural residential properties such as the Miani and Paraiti areas were getting a double discount because not only did we pay 63.4% of the town rate, we also paid lower rates by the very nature of our land values being significantly lower than those in town. We were asked not to raise any questions till the end of the meeting, so I was the very first person to raise a question at the end of the meeting, and with documentation showing our rates and land values in the Paraiti area, I could demonstrate quite feasibly that our land values were far from lower, in fact, significantly higher than most other areas of Napier. So from my point of view, the rationale of fairness of having a double discount based on the 63.4% and reduced land values was a fallacy and a false premise to go forward with on this. That actually didn't get an answer at the meeting, which led to me throwing a tanty and walking out. Subsequently, I attended a second meeting at the McLean Park Hall. The mayor met me when I approached her at the meeting and said that she agreed with that premise and that the double discount was then removed from the presentation, saying we were getting 2 discounts from the area. If the original premise of removing the rural rating system was that we got a double discount, and you then agreed that we weren't getting a double discount based on the land values, why you're proceeding with removing the group. You did recognise in the first meeting at questions that we did get less facilities from the council and had less cost to the council by the nature of not having street lighting, curbs, stormwater drainage, and the maintenance that's done in our area is very minimal compared to town. I do recognise that most of the facilities that are laid on in town, swimming pools, libraries, such like facilities are available to us as well, and we should equally pay for those, although the rural residents are less likely to use those facilities than the town residents, mainly because they're just too busy looking after their life sentence blocks. When I raised the point with Gary in a discussion about our land values being significantly higher than the represented properties in town, his point was then raised that this was a per square metre. We had huge land blocks, therefore our square meterage rate was considerably lower than those in town. I can't see how that is relevant. I'm only allowed to have one property on my large holding. Most of the property is vertical and steep gullies, which is where the water all drains across my land from the roads. It's not usable for anything other than grazing sheep or mowing or planting out to keep it under control. So I'm only allowed one property. I'm not allowed to subdivide my area to make it smaller. I would much prefer it to be smaller. It takes an awful lot of looking after. So the relevance of how many square metres I've got and the square meterage rate is rather absurd as far as I can see, because I'm only allowed one property. There's only a certain number of bedrooms and a certain number of occupants of that property. So I think I should pay the same as the number of occupants in a similar sized property in town, not significantly more. I talked at length to the people at Hastings District Council just to get a viewpoint of what their system is. They have a rating system that's divided into urban and rural. Their rural zone alone has 5 subcategories, and they are actually adding to their subcategories as they do developments rather than removing it. So your rationale now seems to be that you want to reduce the categories of rates. Computers can handle 256 characters, so it gives you 256 possible groups before it becomes an issue. Why would you want to simplify it from already very simple system of 6 categories to 3? I don't know of any other council in the country that has such a small group anyway. Most have significantly more than 6 groups. I find the whole premise of the rationale for doing this flawed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Do we have any questions for Tony? And I guess just to provide a little bit of context around what the general rate and specific covers, and I know you did hear this at the public meetings as well. So the changes that we're proposing do relate to those services and community facilities that everyone has equal access to, whether they choose to use it or not, ranging from libraries through to roads, through to public toilets and cemeteries. But yes, again, acknowledging, as per our conversation at that last public meeting, the services to your door as a semi-rural property obviously are of a different level to what our urban ratepayers would get here in the city area. So thank you very much, Tony, for coming to submit to us today. I really appreciate it. And next I'd like to invite Debra Boonside.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello. Okay, good afternoon everyone. Thank you, Your Worship and councillors, for the opportunity to come in and speak. I sit here pretty much feeling that it's entirely futile, to be quite blunt, because I've sat here many times, I have written many times about council decisions that you're making where you're impacting significantly ratepayers or a collection of ratepayers for no net benefit to council at all. So if I understand it correctly, you're changing the rating system, you've targeted areas like mine, which is Jervois Town Meani, and said that we should be rated as residential, and accordingly applying a significant rates increase. So as a business operator in this community, I go into every single street in Napier, and there's no one that I could go and load a 12.5% increase just like that without offering them anything more. That's my increase. At the public meetings, it was very clearly put, you do not want to hear about individual situations. I'm sitting here going, you absolutely need to hear about individual situations because every ratepayer is an individual. And you can't just select an area and go, well, you know, their places seem like a bit more and worth a bit more and they can probably suck that up and pay that. We can't. We cannot any more than anyone else. So mine's 12.5%. My neighbour is 20% extra. And another neighbour, barely 1,000 metres sort of thing as the crow flies, and her and her husband are near pensioners, they've got to come up with an extra $3,600 a year. So what I'd say to you guys is when you're sitting around with your averages and your percentages and your great ideas about putting this on to people without providing anything more, and I'll come to that in a minute, ask yourself, can you pay an extra $3,600 a year for nothing extra? That's what you're actually doing. And I very much feel like I'm sitting here and this is completely futile because you did it with the rubbish. Extra 40% in costs, absolutely nothing extra in provision of services. So if you want to charge me 12.5% extra, cool, and rate me as residential, great. Let me then allow my property to be 100% treated like a residential property, please. I should like to enjoy all of the benefits that people in town have that a previous speaker alluded to. So if you want me to pay that as if I'm someone in town, because I'm not someone in town, but you've determined that I should pay the same as someone in town, in fact more, because obviously it is a bigger land mass, so I'm actually paying more than people in town anyway. Your actual cash in your hand is thousands from me and hundreds, or to 1,000 from somebody else. So you're already getting thousands of dollars out of me, and you want to get significantly more, 12.5% more off me, whilst returning me nothing at all. So what's the point? Why are you doing it? To me, it just seems like complete bad business to make a massive change and then the net return to council is actually zero. That was what was put out at the public meetings, that you will not be achieving any greater income to council. So it really, really does seem like we are the few. They can just suck it up and pay it. We'll sit round in this room and we'll listen to what they've got to say and we'll just do it anyway because that's really how it's been presented. And it's actually my experience of this council for years. You say you'll listen, you sit there nodding, smiling, and you just do it anyway. And that's really, really disappointing as someone out in the community. I've got 4 ward councillors who represent me. You're all getting a little decrease, probably, you know. So in some ways it's not really affecting any of you. Well, depending on where you live. Depending on where you live. So, and when you're talking about similar properties with similar rating, so I live in a house, it's got 4 bedrooms, a couple of bathrooms. My friend's got the same over in Hollywood Street. You're going to give her back $30 and you're going to charge me just under $400, I think, extra, on top of the thousands you already get. I don't think that's similar. That's not like with like. If that's nearly my time, the only other thing I would say is that many of you around this table adopted the long-term plan back in 2018, where you were going to keep rates rises, and they were all under 5%. So year on year, and including this year, you predicted or proposed that it would be around 4.9%. I'm sitting here and you're proposing to give me extra 12.5%, my neighbour 20%. I don't even know what the percentage is for the near pensioners that I'm talking about that have got to pay an extra $3,600. I think it's close to 50%. It's like, that's not okay. It's just not okay. And nobody in the private sector can go out there and go, bam, we're going to charge you an extra 50% and you can just be quiet and enjoy it. And I'm not going to give you anything more for it. So that's all I would say. If you're going to do anything, you should be creating greater return and better value for everybody. And this is not it. This is absolutely not it. You are so out of touch with the rate of inflation. You are so out of touch with your own long-term proposed plan of acceptable rates increases that you've got it wrong. That's the only way to put it. If you are proposing to charge any individual ratepayer 12.5%, 20% more, 50% more, then you have got it wrong, especially in light of what's going on in the world right now. So thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Debra. Do we have any questions? Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Debra. Thank you for that. The targeted rates are what relate to the services to your door. The general rates, which is where this increase is coming from, at the moment, if you're in the rural category, you are essentially paying 37% less than someone does in town, but with the equivalent property value. And I was just wondering, how would you justify that 37% discount?
It is not a discount. Don't call it a discount.
Well, you're paying 37% less.
Well, I'm actually paying thousands more probably than most people in town, so I'm just not even going to accept that. That's a way that you've reconciled to yourselves putting this to rural ratepayers, and I'm not going to accept it. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Any further questions? Thanks, Debra.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. And next we have Wayne Parker.
Afternoon, everyone.
Welcome, Wayne.
My name's actually Garth. Wayne's my father, so yeah.
Okay.
I haven't got too much to say. Hopefully I don't embarrass myself with my ignorance, but what I've come here for is a property in particular, that being 340 Miani Road, which is the Miani Hotel. To be perfectly honest, we're not actually adverse to our rates going up. The problem we have is the degree to which they're going up. The proposal is that they'll be tripled from the current rate. We understand that it is a commercial property, so the rate should be higher, but the difference being with that particular property is the wastewater and the general drinking water is all bore water and a private system that we've installed ourselves, which currently has cost about $80,000 and of course requires ongoing maintenance and whatnot. So we think it's a little bit excessive. We think that property, I suppose, deserves a bit of discretion as far as it's not definitively a commercial property as such, as the load on the council system is not required, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, so just looking at your father's submission here, Garth, I note that you've been reclassified from other rural to commercial, and I that would explain the tripling of the rates. And I guess it is a unique property in that you are running a commercial operation from the premises in a semi-rural environment. I'll just open up to the councillors if they have any questions in particular. Councillor Crystal? No? Oh, sorry, I thought you had your hand up.
I mean, are there opportunities for discretion? That's probably the problem that the other lady alluded to, is when you reduce the actual classifications, you get certain properties that become in a grey area where they're probably paying over and above, whereas they might be in between A and B, and because there's half as many categories, you've got certain people paying more. My understanding from what I read on the council website is that similar properties should be paying similar amounts, which is fine. And it also said that most ratepayers are likely to see decreases. So our concern is a property like that, are they effectively subsidising another 20 properties by getting penalised quite heavily? But as I say, a tripling in rates is pretty high. A lot of people that have spoken earlier are unhappy about smaller amounts than that, but tripling is excessive, in my opinion.
Yes, and I think there are a handful of properties that have previously been classified as other rural that are in the same situation where they're now being classified as commercial because there is a commercial activity being undertaken on the property.
Yeah.
So certainly that will be part of our deliberations on Thursday.
Okay.
So if there's no further questions from any other councillors, thank you very much, Garth, and say thank you to your father for his submission.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. And I'd now like to invite Gary Schofield.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wise and councillors. My name's Gary Schofield and I appear today on behalf of Powerco Limited, who obviously lodged a submission on the proposed changes to the rating policy and rates remission policy. For those unfamiliar with Powerco, we own and operate the natural gas distribution infrastructure located within Napier City. This network transports gas from the transmission system, which is owned by First Gas, through to each customer's point of connection on their property. We supply natural gas to residential, commercial and industrial customers within Napier City. We support the local economy by supplying a safe and reliable supply of energy. Powerco's assets consist of a network of underground gas distribution pipelines throughout Napier City. The only above-ground assets associated with distribution are the handful of regulator stations which drop the pressure on our network for supply to local areas, which are enclosed in small cabinets or chain link enclosures. And the majority of our distribution network is located within roads. As outlined in our submission, the proposed changes to the rating policy and remission policy are of concern, as a result in our rates increasing by over 1,200%. And actually, I note due to the updated capital valuation, it's actually a little bit higher than that on that updated CV. The majority of this increase is attributable to the new targeted stormwater rate. Specifically, Powerco is opposed to our rates category being changed from miscellaneous to commercial/industrial, and the new targeted stormwater rate being applied to our network. Now, the rating categories appear to be designed to apply to parcels of land that are held in separate records of title, with appropriate categories applied to the land use being undertaken on each parcel of land. However, the categories do not work so well for network utilities that are predominantly located within legal road and do not create the same demands on services and facilities provided across the city by the council. It is my view that the miscellaneous category should be reinstated, or perhaps a new category for utilities be created. This would be administratively easy for the council to implement, as there would not be many instances where it would apply. Importantly, it would more accurately reflect that utilities don't impose the same burden on council services and infrastructure as other land uses. In respect of the targeted stormwater rate, I'm strongly of the view that our network should not be required to pay this rate. The Powerco network predominantly consists of underground gas pipelines, which do not alter the permeability of the ground surface above. As such, it should not be burdened with a rate to address effects that its activities do not create and for which it derives little benefit. The rating policy states that the primary beneficiary of stormwater assets are those properties that have a hard surface. This clearly does not apply to Powerco assets. If the land value of our assets were to be utilised instead of capital value, we would not be required to pay this targeted rate, as we do not own any property within the city. I note that Unison, who owns the electricity distribution network within Napier City, has also submitted on the rating policy. The matters raised within this submission are very similar to those raised by Powerco. I would add that Powerco supports the submission from Unison and would urge the council to carefully consider the points we've made and make appropriate changes to the rating policy. Just turning through to the officer's report, I've read through the reporting officer's report on submissions. Obviously, given the number of submissions received, it's a high-level summary and does not specifically respond to the matters raised in our submission. As outlined, I'm of the opinion that utility networks are negatively affected by the reduction of rating categories. Furthermore, I note the officers state at a number of locations within their report that a targeted stormwater rate would only apply to properties that directly or indirectly benefit from the service. I reiterate that Powerco does not own any properties within Napier City and will derive little benefit from the stormwater assets. In conclusion, I would urge the Council to carefully consider the matters that have been raised by Powerco and also those by Unison. Powerco is seeking, and there's a few different options, either amendments to the rating policy to provide a separate differential for utility assets or properties, or make amendments to the targeted stormwater rate to exempt network utilities that do not utilise the stormwater network, or provide a remission for the targeted stormwater rate for ratepayers who do not utilise the stormwater network, or such other relief which may achieve a similar outcome. This will ensure that Powerco is not burdened with rates to address effects that its activities do not create and for which it derives little benefit. Thank you all for your time this afternoon, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Gary. Councillor Bogue.
Thank you for your submission and your suggestions. Gary, how are utilities such as yours rated in other towns and cities?
That's a good question. I'm fairly new to this particular role in lodging submissions on rating policies, so I understand it's based on a capital value, but I'm not sure. I haven't gone through each different district council to see what that is.
We may be able to get the officers to seek some information on that.
That'd be good.
Through you, Your Worship.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you very much for your submission and again those suggestions. Just interested in the effects of stormwater on your network. As an example, was your network affected at all by the flooding events we had in November? Did you see any perverse outcomes there?
I'm not aware of any direct impacts on our network. I've not received that internally. Certainly, there's literally a handful of what we call regulator stations which drop the pressure. They are small above ground enclosures, but yeah, by and large it's all underground, so it'll be largely unaffected.
Unaffected. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Just following on from that, those regulator stations, if they were to flood, would that cause damage to them?
I don't believe so. They need to be enclosed, obviously, as it's containing a natural gas, so they would need to be sealed to the outside environment. They might have some relief valves associated with it, but they should still be able to function.
Okay.
Councillor Crystal.
So these regulators, are they not on your land? Are they on leased land, or what are they sitting on?
It could either be legal road, or it could be on a council reserve. I think there was one that was on a council reserve, or private property protected by an easement. So we wouldn't actually own the underlying land, but would have a right to occupy and operate that equipment on that property.
Right, Councillor Brown.
Another one. 1,200% is obviously a really huge increase percentage-wise. Just out of curiosity, what's that in real money terms?
I have the letter here. So the current rates are $895.37, and the increase would be $11,713.50. As I mentioned, that will actually be a bit higher due to the new capital valuation, which goes up to about $12,952. So, and the majority of that is associated with the targeted stormwater rate.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you all for your time.
We now have a slight change from the schedule that you have in front of you, and we have Nathan Strong from Unison. Now, just if you go to your other attachments document, it's attachment B, page 49 is the submission. Welcome, Nathan. We'll just give the councillors a moment to find your written submission.
Certainly.
Fire away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and councillors. My name is Nathan Strong and I'm General Manager for Commercial at Unison. I appreciate the opportunity to address you today. So I'm sure that the services that Unison provides will be very familiar to the council, but for the record, we deliver electricity from the national electricity grid to homes and businesses in Napier, Hastings, Taupo and Rotorua. Our network, comprising poles, overhead conductor, underground cables, substations, transformers and switchgear, is obviously integral to supporting the lifestyles and livelihoods of those living in our regions. Unison is owned by Hawke's Bay Power Consumers Trust, who makes a distribution each year to the beneficial owners in the Hawke's Bay. Like Napier City Council, we are highly vested in the success and prosperity of our communities. Unison's submission on the proposed changes to the rating policy focused on the proposed introduction of a targeted stormwater rate, which would see Unison's rates applicable to network assets increase from $2,800 per year to $52,000 per year, an increase of 1,800%. The proposed increase is a result of three proposed elements of the rating policy. Firstly, the proposal to remove the miscellaneous rating classification, which currently applies to Unison's network assets. The proposal to introduce a targeted stormwater rate, the proposal to apply the targeted rate to the capital value of the assets rather than land value. Now, our understanding of the logic for the targeted rate is that it is based on the principle of causa pays. We support the approach of establishing a targeted rate for stormwater and the use of capital value as an indicator of site coverage, but object to the closure of the miscellaneous rating classification. We could find no supporting material in the consultation documents which explain the basis for its removal, and in our submission we requested the supporting analysis and justification for that aspect of the proposals. Unison's substation buildings are on separate titles and contribute to the need for the stormwater system, and we have no objection to those properties being subject to the targeted stormwater rate. However, we do respectfully lodge objection to our network assets being subject to the targeted rate, as they do not cause the need for the stormwater system, principally being overhead assets or cables buried in road reserves and berms. We have read the Council Office's recommendations and high-level reasoning for largely continuing with the initial proposals subsequent to you receiving submissions. Again, we note that the reasoning remains that causes of the stormwater system should pay for it. Specifically, we noted the following recommendation from Council officers. Council is able to base stormwater on factors such as how much of the property is sealed, paved or built on. Although a much more accurate approach to take, it would be costly in terms of time and resources to manage. Barring those areas that have no stormwater network, e.g. rural, it was considered logical to allocate this cost by capital value. Capital value includes the land value plus any improvements to the property. If the stormwater rate was based on land value, then a bare section and an office building with the same land area could, in theory, pay the same amount. When using capital value to apply stormwater costs, properties that are semi-rural or residential would likely have more open land area, which is porous. Commercial and industrial buildings in town generally take up a large proportion of the property, if not all, and possibly have concrete or other non-porous surfaces around the buildings. When it rains, the immediate demand on stormwater would likely come from more from that developed property than the less developed property. There are always exceptions to the rule, but it is a workable approach in most instances. So Unison contends that utility assets are a clear exception to the rule, and that applying the causa pays principle, the inclusion of Unison's network assets within the commercial and industrial rating classification leads to an anomalous outcome where we do not cause the need for the service, but would be levied the targeted rate. Now, in making your final decision on the rating policy, I thought it would be useful to outline the consequential effects on applying the stormwater rate to Unison's Napier network assets. As you'll be aware, as an electricity network business, we are regulated by the Commerce Commission and the Electricity Authority. The Commerce Commission regulates the amount of revenue that we can earn, and the Electricity Authority regulates from whom we can earn that revenue from. The Commerce Commission allows Unison to pass on rate charges from local authority 1-to-1.
So in other words, for every $1 that you charge us, we can on-charge that dollar to electricity consumers. So the financial impact on Unison of the proposal to rate us for stormwater charges is zero. Accordingly, you may wonder why we would object to paying a targeted rate when we can just pass the cost on. Well, the first answer to that question is that we always worry about electricity affordability. Any increase to our costs that causes us to lift our charges to consumers is always of concern. And while we're happy to pay for goods and services that are part of the costs of delivering our service, as we are not a causer of the requirement for the stormwater system, on behalf of our electricity consumers, we object to paying for a service that we do not cause. The second answer to that question is that the Electricity Authority requires us to set our network prices on a cost-reflective basis. Essentially, the same causer pays principle that applies to how we set our prices. So presently, our prices are set on a Hawke's Bay-wide basis. Our assessment is that the costs of serving consumers across Hawke's Bay are relatively similar, and there are significant advantages from an electricity retail competition perspective of a larger Hawke's Bay market than having separate Hastings and Napier pricing zones. But introducing a targeted stormwater rate for Napier would cause us to revisit whether we would need to introduce some form of Napier-based charge to recover the stormwater rate from Napier electricity consumers, as Hastings District Council does not have a similar targeted rate. It could be seen as unfair if we were to simply recover Napier's proposed stormwater rate from all consumers in Hawke's Bay. And if we were to do that, those ratepayers that the Napier City Council intends not to pay the stormwater rate in the Napier rural zones would end up making some contribution to stormwater costs via their electricity bills. I also note that the proposed differential of 250% for commercial and industrial would place a relatively greater burden on Unison for stormwater than residential ratepayers. However, because our assets in Hawke's Bay are heavily focused on serving residential consumers, it would in fact be the residential electricity users that would end up paying a significant proportion of any stormwater rate that is levied on our assets, 53% to be precise. So if it is the intention with the proposed 250% differential for commercial industrial ratepayers to provide a degree of relief to residential ratepayers, by effectively transferring recovery of that part of the cost to electricity consumers, you should be aware that your initial intent would not be fully achieved. So, in conclusion, Unison submits that in our view it would be in the best interests of Napier residents and businesses, both as ratepayers and electricity consumers, for the Napier City Council to accept our recommendation that the proposed targeted stormwater rate not apply to utility assets, by way of either retaining the miscellaneous classification or introducing a new utility classification which would be zero rated. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Do we have any questions? No. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
And next up we have Phil Ellis.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors, for the opportunity of presenting today. I'm probably going to be a little bit different to everybody else that's actually been up here, that even though our property, my name's Phil Ellis, I'm here as a trustee of the Silver Lake Trust, not connected with the people that just bought 15% of the All Blacks, just by the way. We're the owner of the Torora Hills development on the hills in Taradol, the back, and we're suffering something like 500 to 700% increase in what we're going to be paying. So, you know, you've heard a lot of other people talking about getting 10, 20, 30, 50% increase. We're more in the Unison category of massive increases in rates. But anyhow, I'm not really here to talk too much about that. I think that I'm more focused on what's the solution here. I'd like to just get you to focus on the PowerPoint because it differs a little bit from my submission, and then I'm focusing on certain aspects. If I can figure out how to get the next slide up here. Just the arrow key should do it. Here we go. Really, as I see it, there is no perfect solution to this rating issue, and I'm mainly talking about residential, but it probably encompasses commercial as well. I think what you've got to do is try and implement something that is fair and reasonable to everybody. My suggestion is just have 3 simple categories, and they're not based on whether you're rural, whether you're residential, what the heck you are. It's based on what services and what burden do you put on the city council, on the city itself. So I'm suggesting just stick to residential, commercial, and have a 3rd category that is for limited services. And that's all your Bayview, your Parati, Miani, and everybody else that, got good argument. The lady here before and several others, and you're going to hear more tomorrow probably, complaining about they got no services. And they're right, they have got no services. So just to say, well, you're rural, so we're just going to treat you on some sort of basis. It's nothing to do with they're rural. The problem is they're not getting the full services. And we can't deny that. It's the truth. So I'm suggesting that you have 3 simple categories because you're all about trying to simplify the system, and I'm with you on that. I've run many businesses and you don't want too complex a system. So I'm suggesting three categories: residential, commercial, and limited services. If you increase the uniform annual general rate across the board, and it's in the order of $50, maybe at worst case $70 per property, it's only $1 a week. Nobody's going to complain about that. Might be $1.40, $1.50, whatever it is. It's not going to be much. That'll allow you to give a discount to this limited services from what they would get charged if they were charged as a full residential rate. You can give them a discount of about 25%, which is quite significant. So they'll be paying about 75% of what they would if they were classified as full residential. That's not much different to what it is now. They're paying 63 or something. So it's a slight increase. Nothing that anyone's going to be more than really upset about. So it's simple. And what it means is you're moving to a little bit more to a user pay system. As I understand it, at the moment it's about 20% is what you've got as a user pay across the board. And you'll be moving to probably about 22, 23%. So it's not a heck of a lot of difference. But anyhow, that's my solution for that. But that's not my main issue. My main issue is we've got development properties such as ours, and we're not the only one. QV come and revalue our property. In our case, we had 36 hectares. It was valued at 760,000. We now have 26 hectares, and it's valued at 3.23 million. So it's about 5 times as much, even though we've only got 2/3 as much land as what we used to have. So we're facing about a 7 times increase. Nothing to do with you guys putting the rates up a little bit or reducing our discount or whatever. It's just simply because of valuation. So there's an anomaly there somewhere. You can't expect people to pay 7 times what they've been paying. You think about your rates. If somebody came and said you've got to pay 7 times as much as you did last year, you'd be up in arms. And I'm not the only property like this, we may be one of the worst in terms of how much increase we're facing. But what I've got issue with is we're facing this on the potential value of the property. Now, we all know tax is about, rates are about 75 to 80% tax. There's nothing to do with rates. The government limit you to 30% that you can charge across the board. So the rest of it, apart from targeted rates, are, in the general rate, is a tax. It's a wealth tax. People with more money pay more. People with lower properties pay less. So effectively, what you're doing here is you're imposing a tax on future profits. Now, the Mayor will know this as an accountant. That doesn't wash in accountancy. You don't tax something in the future on unrealised profits. It's ridiculous. It's unheard of. It's not done anywhere in the world. Worse than that, there's a bigger anomaly that until the development's finished and houses are built, there's no one actually using any city services. None whatsoever. Sure, they might go to the library, but I'm talking the main services that cost money, like sewerage, stormwater, water, roading, all those issues. There is no cost because there's no one living on them, there's no houses on them. But we're getting taxed or rated on it from day one, every year, whether we develop it or don't develop it, whatever happens. We're getting taxed on future profits. So it's simply not fair. And, you know, I think someone else mentioned what the council objective was. One of the main objectives was that the council, I think in one of your first pages, said one of the objectives was have an equitable and consistent method of rating. Well, equity means fairness and reasonableness. Is 700% increase fair and reasonable? Obviously not. So there's an anomaly there. I've got some suggestions what to do about it. One is one problem developers have got, and it's not just us, it's every developer, Tiawa, wherever, all got the same problem. They see the council as an obstacle to development, not as a partner, not as an assistant, not as trying to help them. In our case, our property, so far, if we don't develop any further, rates have increased to the council, income to the council has increased from about $2,500 to about $80,000 a year. We've spent millions of dollars to enable that to happen. The council haven't spent $1, not $1, in making that happen. We've written cheques to the council of about $250,000. We've developed assets of over $1 million, which we simply hand over at no cost to the council. And the council will now be collecting about $80,000 a year, where they were collecting $2,500. So again, are we talking about equity here? Are we talking about fairness? So what I'm suggesting is a rates remission. You need a system where the council and developers work together to get jobs done, to get developments happening. You know, I'm 68 years old. I remember the Mission talking about their development 40 years ago. Where is it? Hadn't happened. You need to be supportive of developers, not being the obstacle to them, because it's in your interests. You get more houses, helps the public. You get more rates, massively more rates, forever, not just one time, forever. 80,000 in our case, so far, forever, every year. So what I'm suggesting is that if developers come up with a development plan and they submit it to the council, then they get a rates remission back to what their old rates used to be on their properties until such time as the development is done. And they've got to do it in a reasonable time, whether that be 2, 3 or whatever years. So they get on with it. If you don't get on with it, you lose that rates remission. So it forces the likes of us developers to actually get on with it. It also forces your council officers to help us get on with it, because you're going to collect more rates. You know, we're a pretty small time compared with someone like the Mission. You know, they've got 600 odd lots they can develop there. If you gave them incentive rather than a big stick approach, this idea of hitting them over the head with a big stick and putting the rates up doesn't work. Give them an incentive. Say, look, you'll get a rates remission if you submit your plan and you get on with it. If you don't get it done in a certain period, you lose that remission. It'll work for us, I'll tell you now. You know, we don't want to be paying $17,000 extra per year and getting nowhere. We want the council, and I'm talking about the officers here, to get alongside it and say, Phil, what do you need to get this damn development done? How can we help you? Not, Jesus Christ, you know, what about this and what about this, and we've got to get this report and that report and every other bloody thing. It's ridiculous. So if you adopt some system like this, you actually get something done and you improve your revenues. The last issue I have is rates are based on the wrong, they're set on the wrong basis. It shouldn't be on land value. It should be on capital value. The reason I say that is if you go back to what we talked about a couple of minutes ago, rates is primarily a tax. It's a graduated tax. No different to income tax. Guys making more pay more, the guys making less pay less. Same thing here. So what you got to do is base it on the wealth. And just because I've got land doesn't mean my land is more valuable than a few houses on the hill, which are, you know, in the $5, $6, $7 million mark. But they only pay about a quarter of the rates I pay. And you can't tell me those guys are less wealthy, sitting in $5 or $6 million houses. I have nothing against that. That's what New Zealand society is all about. We like to think of ourselves as a equal society. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. We're not objecting to that. We're just objecting to you hitting land wealth, not actual wealth. And it's potential land wealth. It's not even realised land wealth. It's some value coming out and saying, oh heck, I think you can stick a whole lot of houses on here, therefore it's worth X amount of dollars. Someone that's built a $5 million house, that's not potential wealth, it's actually sitting there in front of your face. So that's why it should be on capital value, not land value. Now you wouldn't be alone in this. 70% of the councils around New Zealand rate on capital value, not land value. There's got to be a reason for that. So Napier City's an outlier in that regard. So I'm not here to moan and complain about everything. I agree with the principle of a graduated wealth tax being a big chunk of rates. I don't think it ought to be complete user pay across the board, because there will be certain areas of town won't be able to pay their rates if you did that. So it has to be graduated, but just the method of graduating is wrong. So that's pretty much all I've got to say. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, so any questions?
Yeah,
I'm
thank
all
you
yours.
very much, Phil. Do any of the councillors have any questions of Phil? No, a very clear presentation. Thank you very much.
You've lost two.
Have we?
Break for two councils.
Okay. Thanks, Phil.
I next would like to invite Murray Arnold. And we just have two councillors that have disappeared off. I'm sure they won't be long.
Who's disappeared?
Would you like me just to wait?
Yes, we will wait. I'm sure they.
Toilet break.
Yeah, that'll only be a moment or two.
Next one. Yum.
Right, we're good to go.
Thank you. Mayor, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak to my submission. The focus of my submission was on the reduction of the number of rating categories from 6 to 3 and the impact this has on properties that fall between 5 hectare rural sites and the urban sized sections. I don't intend to repeat what's already in my submission. I have read the officer's report and appreciate the consideration has been given to the many submissions relating to the reduction in the rating categories. I note that the reporting officer's recommendation now includes an additional or fourth category with the inclusion of a semi-rural category. As a long-time citizen of Napier, I understand the need for everyone to contribute to the community in which we live and to treasure those aspects which make the city a very desirable place to live, work and play. The focus of my submission is around a fair and equitable rating system, and I think the initial broad categories proposed were grossly oversimplified. We live on a 1.5 hectare rural residential property which potentially falls within the new semi-rural category. However, would be excluded from this category because we are fortunate enough to have a connection to the city water main which runs past our gate. This is currently taken into account with a targeted rate for water and an annual water meter charge. Wastewater is discharged on site as there is no wastewater reticulation available. The introduction of the semi-rural category is a positive step away from the proposed oversimplified 3 categories. However, the defining characteristic is that it is not connected and cannot reasonably be connected to the city water and sewage systems. I understand that this definition provides a clear and easy to administer differential. However, the use of these 2 factors is unusual when these services are funded by a targeted rate rather than the general rate and general rating categories. And I think that's been emphasised a few times by the councillors here this afternoon. The officer's report clearly states in several areas that water supply and wastewater are targeted services and are funded through a targeted rate. Therefore, to my thinking, it is reasonable to understand, that the general rate is not for funding these two services. I support the introduction of the proposed semi-rural rating category. However, I submit that if the definition of semi-rural is to be retained, as stated in the officer's report, the definition needs to be amended to include any property that is connected to one of the two services, i.e. is not connected and cannot be reasonably connected to the city water and or sewerage system. This amendment would continue to provide a clear and easy to administer property differential and include all those sites of similar characteristics that fall between the urban type properties and the rural. This avoids the exclusion of those semi-rural properties, such as those in Onehunga Road that were mentioned earlier on, that have a reticulated water supply available. I have not attempted to address the applicability of the choice of the 92.5%, as analysis was not available, and I'm uncertain on what basis this has been changed from the 63% that is currently in play. I appreciate that this retains some differential from the urban size sections, but would like to see the basis for the increase to 92.5%. The land value of my property on which a general rate is based is directly related to amenity values and productive potential. There is no subdivision potential under the current zoning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murray. Do we have any questions from councillors? Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't quite pick up. What's the difference between the definition for semi-rural in here and your definition?
So the definition of semi-rural in the officer's report implies that a property would have to be not connected to water or sewer.
Okay.
In other words, both. So if you have a property that is just connected to water and has on-site sewerage, it would not fall into the semi-rural category.
Okay. And so you're saying it would be, if they have one but not the other, then it should still be classified as semi-rural.
That's right.
Yep.
A little bit difficult. I was having trouble in trying to come up with wording that might be appropriate, but I'm sure the officers could address that.
Right. Thank you very much, Murray.
Now we do have another submitter that's not currently on the lists in front of you, so I would like to invite Maurice Lloyd to come and speak to us, and his submission is in attachment B, page 91.
He's on there. He's here. 38. Yep.
No, he's not on mine.
He's on the list here.
I couldn't find it.
Oh, is he in here?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's just not on this
Page
page.
38.
Great.
Welcome, Morris. Is it Morris or Maurice?
Morris is
Morris.
fine. Thank you. Lady Mayor, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak to my submission. We purchased our property in 1993, some 28 years ago. We live on the outskirts on Waverley Road, which is bounded by Maraenui, Jervoistown and Miani. You're probably all aware, but it's a mixed land use area, productive, agricultural, horticultural with lifestyle properties. In 1989, some 4 years before we bought the property, there was a reorganisation of the lands in this area, and our land came within the Napier City Council. There was assurances given by politicians at the time that the rural ratepayers would be protected from paying full city rates based on the actual services that those properties would use and that were provided by the city for them. There was also the factor of the distance from the facilities in town that was to be taken into account. The Local Government Rating Act in 2002 has picked up on those considerations, and it's embodied them in law, requiring local authorities, when setting rating differentials for different areas, to have regard to a variety of matters, including the provision or availability to the land of a service provided by or on behalf of the local authority. In other words, whether the council's providing sewerage or water or something like that, and where the land is situated. In other words, the land's not in the middle of town, it's some distance from the centre of town. Our objection is to the reduction in categories, specifically the proposed cancellation of the other rural and the change in our situation to residential. Other submitters have spoken to this, and the previous submitter spoke in some detail about that. The council's proposal for our property with these rates changes can be summarised as this. What you're saying to us is something along these lines. Look, things have changed since 1989. The city's grown. Your property should now be primarily defined as residential, despite where you live, and you should now pay full residential rates. That's somewhat insulting. The slogan that you've used, similar Napier properties should pay similar rates, is clearly at odds with the considerations council should have regard to in relation to their statutory regard under the Rating Act. So what's the effect for us? Well, we currently pay approximately $2,200, and we would be asked to pay about another $400 increase. What matters not to us is not how you break it down into categories, but it's the bottom line. We're a consumer. We buy a product from you. We don't want to know that so much is sewage and so much is this, because accounting can present things in different ways. You can ask any accountant and they'll give you a different set of accounts to produce a different result. What the consumer is interested in is how much more do we need to pay? So if you say to us, look, Morris, next year you're going to pay another $400 and, oh, sorry, but the valuation of your property, which has just happened in the last year, has increased it substantially, so you're going to pay substantially more than that. Of course you're going to get me along here to talk to you. So I say, what's happened to our land since 1989? What have you done for us? And other people here have said the same. Well, I can think of one thing. You've given us recycling. We get recycling uplifted from our gate. And the other thing in it, and this is slightly off target, but you've provided local access to great bike trails, tremendous bike trails. But could we please have safe access over State Highway 1 to Marine Parade at Awatoto, please? Now, getting back to our submission. What hasn't changed? The necessities of life that you provide to us, or in your case, don't. But you do provide to residential owners in the city. Water, you don't give that to us. So what do we have to do? We have to provide our own bore. We have difficulties in the summer with the supply. We have to put in a filtration system. We have to have it serviced yearly. And it looks, looking ahead, that we're going to have to provide tanks in future. Sewerage, you don't provide this to us. You've got a high pressure sewage line running past our gate to Awatoto, but you won't let us connect to it. So we have to replace our old septic tank with a modern aerated tank, which has got screens and pumps in it. We've built a raised septic field where we drip feed onto it. The system was damaged recently by floods, and I've just had to pay a repair and service bill of about $650 to have it pumped out and have new filters and things installed. Other things we don't get out there, no realistic access to bus routes. Probably I've I've said here with the access to the bike trails that's probably not so bad for us, but for other older people, that is a concern. You don't give us footpaths, you don't give us street lighting, and you don't provide incentives for the internet people to provide cabling for us down our road. So, in summary, this rates review is timely, but the basic facts on which the changes have been proposed for our area haven't changed since 1989. The statutory requirements that you're required to have regard to relating to the provision or availability of services are relevant to the percentages for the non-city residential properties. I support consistency and fairness for Napier City ratepayers. I also support not pretending that the basic facilities provided by the council to the city residential ratepayers are the same that you supply to us. So following your slogan, say it, you don't provide water and sewage facilities to us, and until you do, don't pretend that we're the same as city residential. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Maurice. Do we have any questions from councillors? I would just ask, do you currently pay the targeted rates for water and sewage in your property or no? Because they don't sit within the general rate, they are charged separately as targeted rates.
I'd come back to the point, Your Worship. The point that's relevant to us as a consumer is what you charge us at the bottom line. How you change it and how you vary them and how you say what these costs are and we have no knowledge as how you come to that point. The only knowledge that we have is what you ask us for at the end, and that's what we pay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. If there's no questions, thank you very much for taking the time to come and submit to us today. Now, our next submitters aren't actually due to be here until after afternoon tea. We're running a bit ahead of time. I don't suppose either of them are here, though, in the interest of continuing. No? Okay. Oh, well, we will adjourn until our last couple of submitters for the day arrive.